different environments along Route 1. It is a lot of different places. It's a long study corridor that we are looking at. There are lots of different kinds of environments: residential, retail areas, areas that are easy to walk along, areas that aren't so easy to walk along. Lots of issues and concerns that you all have and that you bring to the table as we begin this study. And so we want to make sure we hear those. I'm going to move quickly through several of these technical points, an overview of the work that we're doing, and we want to leave some time for your questions and answers, and especially to hear your input later around these display boards and around the tables as we talk to one another. This is a list of only some of the previous studies. Don't expect you to memorize this list, but there are many important previous efforts, including the VDOT Centerline study that's become an environmental document more recently, including several focused transit efforts of Route 1 transit study, as well as the ongoing Fairfax county-wide transit network study. Again, this idea of an alternatives analysis that we're up to now that's going to synthesize that previous work and bring them into one recommendation for implementation at the end of our work. A word about Fort Belvoir, a really important portion of this corridor, a huge generator of travel because there are so many people that work at Fort Belvoir. All told, let me move to this slide. All told, almost 40,000 employees in the Fort Belvoir complex of locations, and that's only going to grow, that number of employees. Those employees get there, by and large today, by automobile, and there's growing traffic along Route 1 as those people access Fort Belvoir. Their most frequented gate at Kingman Road sees 1,600 cars in the peak hour. That's a lot of vehicles in one place at one time. So that's one of the major factors that we're considering is this growth in and around Fort Belvoir. And Fort Belvoir has done its own planning work, and they've recognized the need to reduce over time the number of trips that are by single-occupant automobile, and they're also emphasizing transit solutions in their planning. Again, this is a graphic that summarizes some of those recent studies along Route 1. Transit study shown there in red, the roadway study by VDOT that's recommended a 6-lane section along the entire length of the corridor shown in orange, and then some improvements that are already underway around Fort Belvoir in green. So a word about process. All of us, I think, like to get to something that's more defined, that's an outcome, or even a plan that you can start to look at and touch, a very tangible thing. An alternatives analysis is a little bit about process, so bear with us as we sort of talk about arrows and concepts, because it's really important at this stage of the game, this defining the purpose, defining the goals, because that's how we can agree upon the outcomes at the end. So we really encourage your input and serious thought about some of these goals and objectives, so that as we move further into the study, we can point back to those goals and objectives and say, we had this conversation about goals and objectives, the way we're measuring the recommendations and the alternatives against one another goes back to that place. And so we have this list of sort of purpose statements that we need you to react to, and you'll have a chance to react more explicitly to those later. And I invite you to brave going all the way back to the back of the room when we break up for the discussion period, because that's where you're able to look at some of these more definitive goal statements and react to them and put some dots on them. We have those posted on the website as well. More process. This is a year-long focused study, and we are here in October. Our next public meeting is scheduled for February, and we're doing a lot of technical analysis between now and then. So we're taking some very broad general ideas, and those were going to be translated into much more specific alternatives from the transportation perspective for your review in the winter time. So backing up again a little bit, who lives and works on the corridor? How many people are we talking about? A lot of growth. 2040 will be 100,000 people in the areas around the corridor, as opposed to today 60,000 people. And jobs are set to grow as well. 69% increase in residents and 60% increase in jobs. How do people get around today? Well, by and large, by automobile. What is transit supportive development? Now, this is the link that Tim talked about with land use, and there's a growing awareness in life, especially in the metropolitan area around Washington, D.C., that our decisions with respect to how land is developed have a really close relationship with how we travel around. And so we want to take a few minutes and point out some of these important connections for you. And so the goal in this corridor and other places where we're trying to figure out how to solve transportation problems is to look more broadly at how are we using the land? Are we mixing some of the residential and commercial development so that people can walk between certain destinations? They can walk to do their errands. They can walk to do some of their routine parts of life. And then we're talking about focused activity around transit stations and around transportation modes. Is that how I point this? Is that the problem?
Turn the other microphone off.
I turned it off.
Yes, where that ceiling speaker is.
The other mic is off. I'm sorry. Maybe if I shout, should I just try that for a little bit? I'll try to project if that's a little bit better.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, the link between transportation and land use. We're trying to create places. We're trying to create and develop places where people desire to be, not only live but to spend a little time, and those places tend to be supportive of investment in public transportation as well, because there's a concentration of people already, and public transportation is closely linked with pedestrian travel. And then I always like to come back to this point about in a region, in a broad region, the way to improve our environmental footprint is to actually attract people around that infrastructure that already exists, as opposed to building new infrastructure, building new housing in the fringes of a region. There are many of good examples nearby and further afield that we point to when we talk about the links between transportation investment and the way we plan how to develop land and how to live and work on those areas. Not too far away in Arlington, Virginia, a lot of planning around how housing and retail and other development happened around the Metro Rail investment. Here's a light rail investment and system in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you can see here a good example of multimodal, pedestrian, bicycle, transit, all in one place. And then some housing of different scales that was developed around that transportation investment. Example from Cleveland, which is a bus rapid transit investment in the downtown of Cleveland, going out into suburbs, ways of integrating transportation investments within the existing context, whether it's urban or more suburban. So we talk about priorities, and it's really important that we grapple a little bit with priorities when we go toward making some of these decisions. And the priority needs to be locating some of these functions close together: jobs, housing, destinations. And the other priority that we need to come back to is, can people walk to get on this transportation investment, this transit investment? If we make the roadways and the places too wide or too
or not very natural for pedestrians, it's hard to support that kind of transit investment. And so one of the key issues we're talking about in the Route 1 corridor is the overall width of that corridor, and the way it can invite or not invite people to use the transportation and public transit that is there. These are places that we want to be. There are other people in these places. There are places to relax. There are places to do our errands, to get a cup of coffee. We want to create places that are inviting and that invite people to stay. We also want to talk about the range of housing patterns that would be associated with a sort of transit-friendly corridor. And there's a wide range from the more low scale. This is a photograph from Kentlands, Maryland, fairly low scale residential. Another Maryland in King Farm. This is a little bit higher scale with more multifamily aspect to it. Not far away in Merrifield, Virginia, some new development that's of a slightly higher scale around near some of the metro, near the metro station there in Merrifield. And then this is a photograph from Washington D.C. Again near a metro station, but larger development, shopping, and office development. So there's a range of development patterns that can happen that all lend themselves toward a transit supportive environment. So and those are things to envision as we think about the future of the Route 1 corridor. Not every place along Route 1, but as we think about this corridor, what will it be in 20, 50 years? So now let's step back for a moment and talk about the goals and needs of this corridor. The project team has spent some time and mental effort in framing the needs and goals. We want to just walk you quickly through that. We have labeled these needs, and we're going to go into detail on each of them. So the first goal and the needs that are associated with that are to improve multimodal travel options. We've noticed that the transit today in the corridor is not as frequent as it might be. The Rex Express, which is a great new improvement in the northern part of the corridor, is at 11-minute frequencies in the peak period. At the southern end of the corridor, the PRTC services are 30-minute frequencies. We want to think about public transit that can provide a competitive travel time. We've looked at a couple of instances where, okay, how do I get between Fort Belvoir and Huntington Station by transit? That's a 35-minute trip as opposed to a 20-minute automobile trip. A little bit more tricky trip is from Woodbridge to Fort Belvoir. You have to make a transfer if you're taking transit. You take VRE and then transfer to a bus at Lorton. A 40-minute travel time as opposed to a 15-minute automobile commute. Just some observations about how people can get around by public transit today. Bicycle. The connectivity of the existing bike routes is a little bit patchy. There's not a continuous bicycle path that will let you go along the length of the corridor. Lots of good bicycle facilities, but there's not a connected network in this corridor. That's something that we're taking seriously and looking at in this study. So the second goal is about safety and access. So the current conditions, if you've all walked and tried crossing Route 1, are that it's difficult. Sometimes there are sidewalks, sometimes there are not, sometimes there are crosswalks, and sometimes there are not. The counties, both Fairfax and Prince William, are working on programs to improve these conditions even as we speak. So some of those improvements will be on the ground and happening in the near term, whereas this study is looking a little bit further into the future. But we note these things, and we want to do a better job of connecting and inviting people along Route 1 and to Route 1. This is just a little scatter plot map of the blue dots showing where there are crosswalks that are signalized, and the gray ones which don't have an existing place for pedestrians to cross. Many of you are probably here tonight because you experienced traffic along Route 1. We're documenting closely where those traffic hotspots are, and we'll be doing much more detailed traffic analysis as this study goes forward, so that we can strike the right balance between a transit investment, the investment that goes into maintaining travel lanes, and then those interactions between those transit, traffic, and then also the pedestrian and bike modes. The third goal relates to economics, both on the side of supporting people's existence and on the side of supporting new development. We note that there is a large portion of riders now that depend on transit who may be lower income or moderate income. And so we need to provide a strong system for those riders so that they can continue to have the economic competitiveness that they need, and also invite new riders to a transit service. We note that much of the future growth in this corridor will be focused into nodes or centers along the Route 1 corridor. So we've outlined those. And the planners, from the demographic planners, the land use planners, the transportation planners, have gotten together and they've looked at these locations, and they've developed plans around some of those centers for future development, such that development can happen in those areas. And that accomplishes a lot of things. One, it focuses that development so that it doesn't encroach upon residential areas that are sensitive, or natural areas that are sensitive. Another thing that it does is that it lends itself to that kind of transit supportive environment that we talked about earlier, where there can be a rich mix of people and jobs and housing that may be a little bit more accessible by walking. This fourth goal relates to health and the environment. So we all, I think, have a concept that if we ride as a group somewhere, whether it's a carpool, van pool, or getting on a train or bus, that we're actually reducing our carbon footprint. It becomes a more and more important concern. We also are reducing our family expenditure on transportation when we choose to use public transportation, or we choose to walk or bike for our commute or our other trips. One study showed that a family or a household saved $6,000 a year on transportation expenses. This difference is mostly due to a two-car household versus a one-car household, but an ability to make that choice because there's transit available. And then there's the health aspect, which I think is also intuitive, but if there's a habit or an ability to walk or bicycle to school or to work, there's a longer-term health ramification for individuals based on that ability. And so if we are able to provide a walkable environment, there are some real health benefits that come out of that, short and longer term. So as Amy mentioned, we really want to think of as many ways as we can to elicit your good input for the study. So we encourage you to look at the website. The website's going to be as interactive as we can make it, so that some of these display boards and materials can be easily accessed, and so that you and your friends and colleagues can go there and give us input through the website. We encourage you to talk with us. We're going to be taking notes. Those become part of the project record. Each of the team members is going to be taking notes today. We also want to encourage you to come back to the next meeting. You're going to carry some important continuity through this year of transportation study. So we value your being here and want you to come back. So please come back and join us for the next public meeting in February. Then these other outlets will be sending out information to you. And then you can contact Amy or Tim for further information. And at this point, what we'd like to do is turn it over for 15 minutes of question and answer.
Okay. First and then, who just said Amy? Can you turn the lights back on so we can see? Oh, sorry. There you are. Okay, go ahead.
My question is, what is the primary factor in determining what mode of transit you would be recommending? What is the most important determinant in making that decision?
Yeah, the question for those who didn't hear was, what's the most important factor for making a determination on what mode of transportation we would consider? That's a hard question because there are multiple factors as we try to determine what the most appropriate one is. A broad way of responding to that I would offer is that there's a right size transit investment for the anticipated growth and development in this corridor. So getting that right size of the level of service, the cost of the service, as well as the capacity of that service is what we're after. So if I can spread that broad net, but it's right sizing the decision, I think.
Isn't that what the study's there to offer?
So what we are going to be doing, what the Multimodal Alternatives Analysis will do, is it sets us up to enter into a federal planning process, the New Start, Small Start planning process. And there are a variety of criteria that this project would be evaluated on. So land use is becoming more and more important. Ridership, cost per rider is something that the Federal Transit Administration is looking more closely toward right now. They are looking at congestion relief. So how we measure that, there are some guidance that we're still waiting on from the Federal Transit Administration. There have been some fundamental changes in how they evaluate projects due to the update of the MAP 21. So it's moving ahead for progress, I think, for the 21st century. It's changed the way we move our transit projects and how we seek federal funding. So there are a variety of criteria that we're going to be looking at based on how the Federal Transit Administration will evaluate this particular project. But what we'll do is we're going to evaluate every mode. You saw bus rapid transit, light rail transit, heavy rail. Monorail is included because it's identified in the Fairfax County plan. So we will be looking at that. So we will evaluate each of those alternatives, each of those transit alternatives equally. So we're not biasing bus rapid transit or heavy rail transit. We want to understand, put a level playing field out there, understand what is the land use going to take, what's it going to look like for heavy rail, for extending metro, what's it going to look like if it were light rail transit, what's it going to look like if it were a bus rapid transit. Those are critical fundamental decisions that both the elected leadership in this corridor and the public need to have a good understanding about so that we can make an informed decision. So, and there is always the do nothing. There is what's the best we can do with just what we have today. We are looking at the highway element as well. As we mentioned, there's the VDOT Centerline study. So we want to make sure that whatever recommendation comes out of this study, because it's a multimodal study, it will move forward with the highway recommendations as well, going through the Federal Highway Administration. So at the end of the day, it's very likely that we'll have road improvement recommendations and we'll have transit recommendations that will move forward. But part of this process helps us to evaluate that. It helps us to evaluate where the transit would be in the right of way that we have. Is it going to be in the median? Is it going to be on the curb lane? And what does that look like? What does that look like from a traffic impact perspective? What impact does that have on existing travel? So there are a variety of things that we're going to be looking at to help us to make that informed decision. So it won't just be cost, won't just be ridership, but it'll be a variety of things that we can measure equally each of the different transit technologies. So I hope that helps to clarify.
If I can just add the reason why I asked the question. Today, I had a group that came into my office that was looking at a major shopping center along Route 1. They want to take down that entire shopping center, and consistent with what every other developer was committed to redevelop Route 1, instead of commercial office, everyone is coming in asking for the right to do intense residential development. And that's exactly what they talked about today. Office maybe a little, but they want to come in and build places for people to live along the Route 1 corridor. So that is the trend in terms of the land use developer. And they're all coming in asking, forget about doing office because the market is soft, but the residential sales and rentals is very, very strong. And I think in your study, I would hope that you would consider that change that has occurred in the Route 1 corridor, because obviously it has an impact, I believe, on the results of your study. Because the intensity of development and the number of persons to be served, I trust, is a very important factor to justify one mode versus another. Okay.
Have you been doing this study all year? Why do you think to do another one?
There have been a lot of studies
I know
that have happened, and we noted several of them. And we did, last year, we did look at all the different studies, we made some recommendations. And in order for us to have a decision to move forward through the federal process, we need to go through this step. Because what this will do is this will help the locals to make their decision. Once the decision is made on what transit might move, what's preferred, what the preferred alternative is, then we'll move that on into the project development process through the Federal Transit Administration. So that's what this process will help us to do. And we haven't been able to have this type of planning study in the past. There have been a lot of studies, but they have not been conducted in this manner. We have a question back here and then over here. Yes, sir.
Could you give us a little bit of summary of what the vision for Route 1 is so that it integrates both the land use and the transportation? Because land use and transportation can be in conflict depending on what the intents of the land use is versus the transportation intents and vision.
And we're looking at what's existing in the existing comprehensive plans, what is in the future comprehensive plans. We'll understand what that would support. And then if you want to have a light rail or if you want to have a heavy rail, this is the land use and this is what you would need to have to be able to support that. So through this process, it's going to help us to come up with that type of vision. It's also going to help us to understand what the supporting infrastructure will be needed. So what bicycle and pedestrian facilities are going to be necessary, crossings, safe crossings, station locations. There are different footprints for the various technologies. So for mass rapid transit, you have maybe a smaller footprint. For light rail, it might be a little bit larger. For heavy rail, metro rail, it could be even larger than that. So we want to take into consideration the station locations as well. Back here. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I'm kind of concerned that your definitions are much too narrow.
Okay.
You're talking about Route 1, essentially Richmond Highway,
Yes.
but you've really got a whole corridor. I mean, right now with BRAC, we've got a half-mile backup every day at Mount Vernon at the stop sign. You don't have any connection between Springfield and Fort Belvoir. I mean, if you're going to do a transit, it would seem to make sense to break out of the hub and spoke thing you've got now and have linkages between these. So having a link from Springfield through Belvoir, and then even taking the very natural right-of-way you've already got from the old Fort Belvoir Railroad, connecting those, or connecting it to the border. But you're just focusing much, much too narrowly on Richmond Highway and not the connections that really make it useful.
And that's duly noted, and we understand that we need to be, we're going to identify where those connections are going to be made. But what we're trying to do is really understand what improvements within the Route 1 right-of-way would be needed, and what transit, if it's going to be a higher capacity or a high capacity dedicated right-of-way, what's that going to look like within the Route 1? But you're exactly correct, and it's duly noted, making those connections to Springfield, making these logical connections, even down in the Woodridge area, to BRE. We need to make sure that we're respecting that, and because we want it to be a system. We want people to not only be able to have a one-seat ride, but make logical connections where it's needed and where it can work. So, thank you for that. Yes.
In the late spring of next year, presumably you will come up, this study will produce a recommended alternative. That recommended alternative will have to be adopted by some entity, some sponsoring entity, to be accepted, for the whole idea, to be accepted by the Federal Transit Administration. Who makes that determination? Is it the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors or the Prince William County Board of Supervisors, or is it someone else?
That's a good question, and I imagine it'll be a combination. I would imagine that it will be, there will be recommendations, and we will work with our executive steering committee. We do have an executive steering committee that's comprised of our elected officials within both of those counties. So we will work with them through what that process is going to be, but ultimately, you are correct that it will need to be adopted into the fiscally constrained long-range plan before we can seek advancement into the Federal Transit Administration's New Start, Small Starts program.
You don't want to leave out the federal and state involvement, because I think all of us are going to be making a decision, particularly as far as the recommendation and how we fund it. So.
And the funding is certainly, will be something that we're looking at. Obviously, we're not doing this thinking it's free. So we're going to identify what the costs are, what the anticipated revenues would be, where we're going to get the money. So we'll have capital and operating costs associated. Now, to understand, they're going to be high level because we're at the very beginning stages. So we're at the 50,000 foot stage right now. So they're going to be planning level costs. But then as we move forward, we'll refine those costs based on the advancement of that particular decision, that locally preferred alternative. But so there will be a federal, a state, and a local participation in the cost of that. But this is a local decision, and the Federal Transit Administration is very clear it is a local decision. So where the state comes in, we're partners in that, but we don't necessarily say you will do this or you will do that. We like to be at the table, but we're not really the decision maker on that. So those are local decisions, but we will be there to support that in whatever way we can. Yes, Supervisor McKay.
Amy, I just want to go back to the last question, because this is a really important question, which is the people going over to the Springfield area. And it's a key point, because not everyone in Route 1 is going to a destination in Route 1. Part of our bottlenecks are there's not enough connectivity to other parts of the county. And I don't want anyone leaving here believing that we're not looking at that. In fact, the county is doing a countywide transit analysis to create a transit network countywide. Because Route 1's ability to tie into the rest of the county's network is really critical if we're going to alleviate congestion. So we're not just looking at Route 1. We are for this study. But then we will look at the countywide transit analysis and tie whatever the decision is for Route 1 the best way we can into the rest of the county's network. And that's a separate study that's being done countywide. Some folks in Route 1 have been involved in it, but we're absolutely looking at that, because if we're going to solve the problems of congestion on Route 1, part of it's going to be how you get people from Route 1 into the other parts of the county more conveniently.
Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent point. And certainly Tom and Leonard with the Fairfax County staff, as well as Supervisor McKay and everyone in this area have been working diligently on that study. So there are good recommendations coming out, and we are taking those, and we are coordinating with that study process. Thank you, Supervisor.
Yes, when you're looking at demand for traffic that Fort Belvoir generates, the hospital is largely an outpatient facility, so not the number of employees is important. Well, that's important too, but the number of visits you get there is also very important. We need to include that in traffic plan.
Okay.
Also, visits to the new museum that gets built will be important.
Okay. And those are special generators, and we'll make sure that we keep those in our mind, and hopefully keeping track of those items. Yes, sir. Okay.
I'd like to tag on to what Supervisor McKay just mentioned. We're working to get ourselves across the county to places like Tyson's, where other people, folks that live here do work, and to Springfield. But we also have a bit of a bottleneck when we get up to the City of Alexandria line. And in one of the most recent meetings we had with you guys, there was a discussion that the city is not interested in collaborating or working with this study to see what can be done to ease that bottleneck up there. Is that what I understood?
I don't believe so. I mean, I don't know how that came across, but certainly we've been collaborating with the City of Alexandria, and we understand that they have. I mean, they've been doing their study as well. So we will continue that collaboration because we want to make sure that wherever we're stopping on this northern part, that it will make sense for a future connection into the City of Alexandria. But it needs to be conducted in a coordinated fashion because they have gone through significant planning, and it is outside of our scope of what we're looking at. But I do believe that the City of Alexandria is a willing partner, and they have been engaged in our discussions that we've had with them one-on-one.
So we have time for probably one or two more, and if we can kind of keep, the questions and the energy, and take it right into the small group session. We do want to hear from folks and, in the back here, so.
One more, then we have
One more, maybe.
Your map up there jumps out, the obvious solution is a bypass road. Shut down Route 1, make it a pedestrian highway, pedestrian precinct, and buses only. To me, I know it's expensive, but a straight line from that leg there up to there, do away with all this other stuff. I know it's expensive, it's not.
Yes, sir.
This will be the last.
Is there any idea of when the decision was made, and then when it might be in
That's, we will need to put some relative time frame on that, certainly in working with our localities, working with Fairfax and Prince William County staff to understand what they think is reasonable, because if there are going to be changes that's going to impact the comprehensive plan, there are processes involved with that, so we want to be sensitive to that, but that is definitely something as we go through the land use planning process. As part of this, we will be in close coordination with our county staff. So we do want to have time with everyone back at the tables because we have our Citizens Involvement Committee folks in the back who are very familiar with this, and we're also going to have staff, and we can have some interaction time, and we can have a better time of hearing what your thoughts are on these various
I'm
things.
sure you don't have any more questions.
So is there any one more question that anyone has? Want to make sure. One more, okay.
Since Fort Belvoir is such a large employment generator, how involved have they been in this process to date?
We met with them, and we met with them. Is it their?
Christopher Land,
commander?
yeah, he's the master planner.
That's the commander.
Oh, the commander, too.
We met with the commander when we initiated the process with his top staff, and they couldn't be here this evening because they're on furlough. But they did note that they regret not being here, but we have met with them. They are very supportive. They have wanted to include us in the road widening that's happening right now. So I think we have really good willing partners. We have stakeholders that want to see good improvements, logical improvements be made. And I think everybody wants to understand how this corridor is going to be able to go over time. What's it going to look like? So there is an element of understanding sort of what's the vision, what's the desire, what are we going for here, and then how are we going to achieve that? And going forward with these multimodal solutions. The road widening. There is a road widening happening right now. The Eastern Federal Lands, it's going through Fort Belvoir. And it's the, what's the name? Telegraph to Woodlawn. So, and what it's doing is it's widening, but it's preserving the median for transit. So we're happy about that because that's an improvement that, that we won't have to bring into our particular project.
But that is funded because of the hundreds of thousands of people going to the hospital. That's how they got the 180 million, because of the hospital and the number of people going to and from the hospital. And that's why the gentleman who raised the question of the outpatient visits. He's absolutely right. I mean, if this study is going to look at numbers of people, the number of people who are coming up Route 1 to the hospital is very significant in terms of the need for an alternate. He's right.
Well, excellent. Well, I want to thank you very much, each and every one of you, for coming out this evening. Again, we appreciate everyone has a voice. We're glad that you're here to share that with us this evening.